What's been on my mind is our natural propensity to circle back to problem, right? And in awareness, was interesting. The other night I was hanging out with this shaman and these amazing people, and they started asking me questions of the United States, right? And it was very clear in about 3 seconds how I shifted the energy of that group in a not great way, right? And when we can notice that, right, you know, not that what I said they didn't need to hear, but I think the way we deliver things, right, is what we're tweaking into perfection at all times, right? And, you know, because it's interesting here, there's the same amount of poverty, there's the same amount of quote, things to suffer about, but the overall feeling here is people aren't suffering. Right? They're not suffering. And, you know, one thing I notice a lot, you know, on the rarities of when I pop into Facebook is, you know, these ideas that in the United States no one's suffering, like that we're free, and the only reason why we're suffering is because of immigrants, and, you know, just all this stuff, right? Like we'd have food if it weren't for this, you know. And it was interesting because as I spoke to that, this discrepancy between how we present ourselves in the US versus what is real and true, right, was presented in a way of judgment, right? And, you know, interestingly, being around these very happy people, right, it was an instant energy shift. Like, oh, right? Not that they don't have problems too, it's just not. And by judgment, I don't mean it's judgment, you know, in a different level, just in a collective observance, but it's a collective observance through a shield of distaste, right? And we have to be very careful, right? I was so, I mean, it was a huge space to see that shift of energy with my words, right? And the shaman, you know, reached out to me the next day and he said, you know, you're very magical and I know you're here to help us, but, you know, to stay in the flow, we have to be looking at solution, which I thought was interesting, right? Because that's what I'm always preaching, right? So, you know, each one of those moments we have to count as a blessing, right? Especially if somebody is pointing to us in a kind way that, you know, hey, you just suck the energy out of this circle, right? You know, and, you know, this was on the heels of, you know, all this great stuff. But when they started asking me questions, I went into what was wrong, right? Now, we have to be able to see what is out of sync to be able to shift it into growth space and remove fear around it, right? But we can do that without judgment, that what is wrong. And that's a tricky space. Right? That's a tricky space. And I think in my one-on work with people, I do that, that's done in a natural way, right? But taking that out into those spontaneous moments, right, is a lesson for us all, right? Each time we're interacting. And so that was kind of my lesson, because, my interaction with him was very balanced, interestingly enough. He wasn't trying to teach me. It's like we were coming in awareness, and just a very open awareness, until I went over here.
How did you hook up with a shaman where you're at?
Honestly, the woman that lives downstairs came and knocked on my door and said, my friend is a shaman and he's coming, and I think you should come down and meet him.
Wow.
Right? I'm very blessed, because almost everywhere I go, a shaman finds me.
Yeah, I know. That's amazing.
And, it's without searching, right? And, it was interesting, because the first moment that this guy met me, he goes, "Oh, you're an owl," right? And we started talking about, spirit animals, and he goes, you have a high resonance with the plant life on the planet. And I was like, yeah, that's, and then he looked at me, shocked, probably about an hour later, and he goes, "You're a fairy." Like, I said, yeah. So anyway, it was very much like, it was cool, because he would go in and out of English, but in that space of awareness, there was an understanding that was timeless and languageless, right? So the plan is he's going to take 5 of us into the desert to work with the plants, like to, work to bring balance back to the earth. And so we'll see what that looks like. I do know that I was taken up, to the trees in New Mexico. And I move into the jungle on Sunday. So the plants are calling me, for sure. Right? And it'll be interesting to understand the plants in the way they do here. Right? And, be able to share that, So that's my goal, right? Is to keep learning and keep sharing,